Hello everyone, my name is Stephen with a V and welcome to Storytime. Today we're going to be reading some pro-revenge stories, hearing how people have gotten some of the sweetest and most effective forms of revenge on people that had it coming. And let me just say, if you're not already subscribed to Storytime, please consider doing so. But with that being said, let's sit back, relax, and listen to some captivating Reddit stories. I had an office food thief, so I bought a Nanny Cam. A couple of things about me that made it really suck to have a food thief. I have a lot of food allergies, so I can't just get lunch at the cafeteria or at a nearby restaurant. I have a new baby who I'm still feeding and who I pump for them while I'm at work. You know how hungry pregnant people are? Yeah, the caloric requirement for feeding is 100 to 200 calories higher. I am always hungry. Because I have a new baby, half the time I don't manage to show up at work with a lunch. I either run out of time to pack one, or if I did remember, I leave it on the counter. My solution to all of this was to leave lots of non-perishable snacks in my office. And also a lot of candy because I also have a 3-year-old and therefore work is the only place I can shovel Skittles into my mouth without a little hand extending into my field of vision and a little voice saying, please. Snacks that were specially free of my allergens. Some of which were specialty foods because of this. The type of specialty food that just doesn't taste as good as food that contains the allergen and also costs twice as much. Because I'm not getting a lot of sleep right now, I deserve nice things. So because I'm not getting a lot of sleep right now, when I first came back from maternity leave, assembled my snack hoard, and started having things go missing, I genuinely thought I was just losing my mind. Boxes of candy were running out faster than I thought I was eating them. I'd come in the morning and things wouldn't be where I'd left them. At one point, I brought a bag of chips to work, folded the rim of the bag down so I wasn't plunging my arm elbow deep into a grease pit, and then put a bag clip on it when I went home. And when I came in the next morning, the bag was unrolled and re-clipped. I went, wow, I must be more tired than I thought. Rolled the bag back down, and the next morning it was unrolled again. Just little things like that almost every day that made me go, wow, the post-baby brain is worse than I thought. Then I got the flu. And I was out for a whole week. Left behind at the office was an almost full box of Enjoy Life cookies, which are not enjoyable but are free of all major allergens and are also $5 a box for like 12 sad little sand pies with some cinnamon on top. I ate one row of these cookies, and then when I was out of the office for 1 week, I was not eating any of my snack hoard. But someone else was, because I came back to work, opened my box of cookies, and found one. There was one single solitary cookie left. And on further examination, the one box of candy that had been opened was nowhere to be found. And on top of that, the thief had done me the courtesy of opening a new box for me, except that they actually followed the push here to open instructions instead of just ripping one end of the box open like I do. Which they should dang well know at this point because by this time they'd been stealing from me for 2 goddamn months. The combination of these two things, the sheer freaking audacity it takes to open a new box so you can continue stealing from someone, on top of the consumption of almost a whole box of specialty cookies that aren't even good, enraged me enough that, after going to my boss and getting some vague promises about checking if the security cameras in my wing of the building are functional or not, I went straight to Amazon and ordered myself a Nanny Cam. Not for my baby, for my snack hoard. Conveniently, it arrived the day before Valentine's Day. I set it up on top of a file cabinet looking down at my desk. On the desk, I laid out a fantastic spread of bait snacks. I got all my thief's favorites, and then I took it one step further. I bought myself a Valentine heart, broke the seal to make it more inviting, and left it out on my desk. The next morning, I came in to see some very obvious snack carnage. My thief had slowly been getting more brazen. Again, who opens a new box of something and opens it differently than the person they are stealing from? But this was just on another level. Individually wrapped things had been dumped out of their boxes, bits of packaging had been thrown away, and yup, they'd eaten some of the Valentine candy. For shame, office thief. Don't you know that's from someone who loves me? I played back the video. All was quiet throughout most of the evening, and I was just watching the shadows lengthen as the sun slowly set through the hallway window. And then, shortly before midnight, the night janitor arrived and went right ahead and took a 12-minute break in my office, sitting in my chair, eating my food. I started taking screenshots. I got him shoveling candy into his mouth with full palm to lips intensity, pouring things out under the desk to pick his favorite flavors, not even bothering to put them back where he found them. And yes, eating my goddamn Valentine's candy. Screenshots went directly to my boss in an email. I went directly to my boss's door to hover and grin and ask if he'd read my email, and I got assurances of a strongly worded email to the cleaning company and the barring of this particular employee from our place of business. I was also tactfully asked to please take my unauthorized spy camera home, which I did. I thought this was over, until the girl who works the concession stand dropped by to thank me. Apparently, the food thief would start his shift just as she was closing down for the night and would try to get free coffee in that creepy guy way. And then one of the reception staff came by with the same sentiments. I'd never met the guy face to face, but apparently, as a woman, it was not a fun experience to have. I'd shown my screenshots to a few coworkers whose eating OP's food had become office gossip by this point, and word had spread fast. I worked an earlier shift, so I didn't recognize him, but people whose shift overlapped with his did. I hadn't told my husband about what I'd done because when I came home raging about the blatant theft that had gone on while I had the flu, his only response had been, "You really shouldn't be leaving food at work then." But when I came home with the nanny cam and explained where and why I'd gotten it, his reaction surprised me. "You know, I think this is the first time I've seen you stand up for yourself. I'm proud of you." You know what, Reddit? I'm proud of me too. Oh my gosh, what a marvelous story. Yeah, and let me just straight up say, the first comment I had while reading this was, is it legal to have the nanny cam? Because unfortunately, a lot of times there's some weird laws about recording people like that, especially in like private places. So at least they tactfully got told to just take it home. But good on OP for catching this fool for stealing all that food. That's a lot of money that they're just stealing from you with the price of how much food they're taking. I don't know what happened to this dude, but losing his job is honestly like a slap on the wrist compared to what it sounds like he probably needs. Bad roommate, enough is enough. A few years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I moved in with a friend. We'll call him Bob. Bob was a bit of a heavy drinker and partier, but mainly did so outside the house, so it was really no inconvenience. It was me and my long-since ex-girlfriend also living there. I had lost my job and been out of work for a while, not for lack of trying, in a very small town with not much to do for work. Bob worked 2 jobs. He loved money and alcohol so much, he didn't mind if he hardly had a life to get to enjoy it. And my girlfriend worked in a nursing home during the day. I felt pretty worthless since I was no longer the breadwinner anymore, but did what I could to help out. I got food stamps to take on the food situation for the household, cleaned, cooked, and did whatever I could to keep anyone needing to do a thing once they were working for the day. It was literally the least I could do given the circumstances. About a month or 2 into our living arrangements, Bob suggested his old high school buddy, we'll call him Richard, move in. Bob explained that he worked on the boats and he would be gone for a month at a time and back for 2 weeks. Dry, rinse, and repeat. My girlfriend and I thought, shouldn't be a problem, right? Wrong. From moment 1, day 1, Richard was a major passive-aggressive jerk. Bob walked him over to introduce us and he shook my hand in a manner that he was obviously trying to crush my hand and intimidate me. I could tell from how he looked and acted like an entitled jerk, but what he did and said immediately after confirmed it. "So, you don't work and live here rent-free? Must be why Bob asked me to move in. Sure is nice for you, huh?" Before I could say anything, Bob spoke up and clarified that while I didn't work, I kept the house clean, cooked, and kept the fridge stocked. I was not mooching and doing my part. Richard proceeded to say, "But his girlfriend works while he stays at home all day? That's totally not cool. It should be you taking care of her, not the other way around." While I totally agreed that I'd rather be there for her than the other way around, I didn't need this jerk commenting and making assumptions that this was what I wanted or needed to hear. Look, I don't enjoy being the one who stays at home while everyone else works. I'd rather be out there working, contributing, and doing something worthwhile. This is not something I chose. If someone called me and offered me a job right now, I'd take it in a heartbeat. I'd prefer it if you stopped inferring that I'm just a lazy bum, I said as politely as I could despite how angry I was. Richard looked at me like I grew a second head or something and told me to calm down, like he hadn't said anything that was the least bit insulting, even though he clearly had. He didn't apologize, of course, and he eventually met my girlfriend when she came home. Richard was very polite and proceeded to make passive passes at her. "We need to find you a working man," or "You could use someone like me to treat you right." My girlfriend was less than enthused by this and told him it was none of his business and she was more than happy with me. So, from the get-go, neither of us liked Richard at all. We resolved to keep as much space between him and us as possible. Unfortunately, Richard had about as much social awareness, social cues, personal boundaries, and proper etiquette as a rock. He constantly came barging into our living area, oftentimes before, after, or during lovemaking, even after being told to either knock or be acknowledged to enter or not come in at all. Also, Richard turned the upstairs half of the house into a 2-week-long party central when he was home. It was loud. Between having over a dozen people all drunkenly stomping around and being loud, he was blaring music so loud that the entire house was vibrating. His parties were also causing a huge mess in both the house and yard, as well as damage. Richard and his buddies were also cleaning out the cupboards and fridge of all the food for the rest of us, effectively leaving the rest of us with nothing and having to rebuy the food out of pocket. Bob was almost never home. He was either working or at a girlfriend's place. Even when he was home, he came in so drunk that he would pass out so hard he couldn't hear any of it. He also woke up hungover and rushing into work, so he hardly noticed all that was going on. My girlfriend and I sat down with Bob and explained the situation to him. We explained that we had tried talking to Richard and telling him that he needed to quit coming into our living area all the time and to either politely keep it down so my girlfriend could get some sleep for work or take it elsewhere. We also told him about the food, the major mess he was making, and the damage to the house. Bob was livid. He told us he'd have a talk with Richard and fix it. We hoped that would fix the issue. Wrong. This clearly, like everything else, didn't get through at all. And from there, it only got worse. The intrusions into our living area were more frequent, ruining our love life when Richard was home, and the parties got even bigger and more out of hand. A couple of times, the neighbors actually called the cops on Richard's parties and he still wouldn't calm down. It was a living heck. We now knew the situation would never improve and further complaints would only make it worse than before. We couldn't move out given our financial situation, and between us and Richard, being Bob's oldest and best friend, we didn't want to risk getting kicked out for causing issues. So I began finding ways to get back at Richard silently and without a way to try to link it to us. Firstly, he had to do his laundry downstairs since that's where the washer and dryer were located in our living area. So whenever he had to put his laundry in the dryer, I'd stop it and pee in it before starting it up again. All his clothes and bedding smelled like straight up pee and he couldn't figure out why. Richard wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Secondly, whenever Richard was gone, I'd go upstairs and dump out 75% of the alcohol out and replace it with water. This reduced how loud and rambunctious he'd get, with the added bonus of having to go out and get more alcohol in the middle of the night. Effectively, we cut down the disruption by 50%, but it still persisted. Thirdly, I would also, just for fun, put his toothbrush in the dirty toilet while he was out and put it back. Richard started complaining that he constantly tasted poop every time he used his toothbrush and that he couldn't understand why. This was just icing for me, but he actually had a lot of trouble hooking up with anyone because of it. Eventually, despite all this, it didn't rid us of either his presence or behavior, and it was still taking its toll on my girlfriend. This had continued for a few months before I concocted a way to get him out of the house longer. Richard always left on the last Sunday of his 2 weeks off in the morning to return to the boats. He also had a big fancy truck with huge custom tires on it. These tires typically ran about $300 to $400 a tire and were special order tires, hard to find outside of ordering them online. So I started putting nails under a couple of his tires before he left, so they'd puncture his tires when he left, but they wouldn't go flat immediately. He'd get to the boats fine, but his tires would be flat. Richard would have to stay a week or even the whole 2 weeks special ordering or tracking down new tires while he was stuck in the town he was in at a hotel. My girlfriend and I would either have just 1 week of misery or the whole thing being peace and quiet. It was glorious. This continued for about 2 or 3 months before Richard finally couldn't take all his misfortune anymore. He told Bob he was moving out when he got back and that it was because everything was going wrong since he moved in. This was especially funny because Bob told us afterwards that he was planning to ask Richard to move out because he was trashing the house, driving up the utilities, eating all the food, and refusing to pay the difference. Richard finally showed up a week late from the boats because of the tire situation, so there was no time for him to relax. Between finding somewhere to put his stuff, somewhere to live, and move everything, this took him all of his final off week to do. Finally, on his last day, Richard came busting into our room and started being rude, saying he was leaving because everything had been going wrong and felt off since he moved in, clearly wanting sympathy or something. We just nodded and said that's tough while going about our business. Richard just kept going on and on about everything, despite the fact that we weren't paying him any attention and you could clearly see that we didn't care about anything he had to say. Finally, we both just got fed up and looked him dead in the eye and told him he had been a terrible roommate who had no respect for anyone and that he deserved everything that was happening to him plus some. He stormed off and we never saw him again. Bob did tell us that he'd been couch surfing since he moved out and that nobody would let him stay with them because of his behavior. It was glorious and it brought a smirk to my face every time I heard it. I've long since moved out and no longer with that girlfriend, and my life is in a much better place. I lament to myself that maybe I was being too underhanded and vindictive, but this guy was toxic and in all honesty, he got what he deserved. I just hope no one else gets stuck rooming with this guy. Edit. I would like to clarify that in this situation, I was not the leaseholder or on the lease. Bob was both the leaseholder and on the lease naturally. Richard was also Bob's oldest friend from like age 9 or whatnot, and my girlfriend and I were recent friends, maybe a couple of years tops. Trying to voice the problems only made the situation worse. Escalating the situation would do the same and could potentially find us without a place to stay, period. Our financial situation was not such that moving out was even an option. I'm not proud of what unfolded, and if there were a better solution to the problem, I'd have taken it. Unfortunately, there was little to be done about it in a legal and face-to-face scenario. Also, Richard did massive damage to the house. The front porch guardrails had been all but ripped off and thrown in the yard. The upstairs carpet, which was originally an off-white color, was now brown/borderline black from spilled drinks, food, vomit, and whatever else you can imagine. You couldn't walk on the carpet with your feet sticking to it. Richard also completely ruined Bob's furniture too. His couch was originally a light tan color and it was similarly stained and pocked full of cigarette burns. The end tables and coffee table were chipped, cracked, and so unstable that they literally fell apart if you bumped them hard enough. The upstairs was a literal cesspit. It smelled absolutely horrid and trash. Food and dirty everything was strewn everywhere. It took an entire day or two to clean up after he went off, and that was my job. So I'm not saying it justifies everything we ended up putting him through, but the crime justified the punishment. And for all the flack I get for the toothbrush thing, my dad had this saying he had for people who like to talk or stir up crap. It goes, "Do you taste all that crap coming out of your mouth, or are you just comfortable with the taste now?" I felt that, considering all that Richard had said about me and my girlfriend, none too quietly behind our backs and directly to our faces, it was time he actually tasted it for himself. As for the outcome, Richard realized his fast, loose, and loud lifestyle only afforded him conditional friends. Sure, they'd party where he had somewhere to do it, but they had the decency and common sense not to do it in their homes. Hence, Richard was lucky enough to get a couch to crash on from time to time. Unfortunately for him, his party drive took hold, and whenever he was alone in their places, Richard foolishly tried throwing a party. He was promptly thrown out the door. Richard burned down all his friend bridges and shortly thereafter started going to stay in hotels and motels in the area. He quickly got blacklisted for trashing the rooms and partying loudly throughout the night. Bob was as much Richard's friend as Richard was Bob's, but Richard absolutely ruined the relationship beyond repair and he no longer had any true friends left. Last I heard, Richard was sleeping in his truck because he refused to get his own place because "I don't see the point in getting my own place when I'm hardly ever there." Like an idiot. Oh my. Oh man. What a story and a half. That went on quite a while. A couple of things. 1, those punishments, as OP would call them, they seem a little rough to me. I get this dude is trash, absolutely ruined the upstairs of this place, but making everything he owns as far as clothing and bedding smell like pee, making him eat literal poop every time he brushed his teeth, and ruining his tires and making him spend probably thousands of dollars trying to get new tires every single time, it's a little bit extreme. And I don't know, I'm struggling to think there was absolutely zero option for him and his girlfriend to move out. I feel like if you wanted to get out of someplace bad enough, you could probably figure it out. Overall, it's kind of a sad story to hear how destructive Richard has been with his life and how he doesn't kind of realize it, and there's no real resolution here. It's just, we got away from Richard, I'm in a completely different place, and Richard is still completely destructive, living in a truck, and will just never seem to see the light of what he's doing to himself. But with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. Thank you all for listening and watching the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to Storytime and leave any feedback you can in the comments below, as I'm always working to develop this craft of sharing these stories with you lovely people. Thank you all again for watching and listening to the Storytime channel.